25? Did you hear you could save up to 25% off grocery store prices at BJ's Wholesale Club?
Did you say save up to 25% at BJ's?
Yeah, save up to 25% at BJ's.
Whoa, that's like saving up to 1/4 of... Ugh, that's gonna leave a mark.
BJ's, absurdly simple savings. Shop today. Not a member? Go to bjs.com/simple savings.
Get to the chopper! Here's Johnny. This is Sparta! So serious. Autobots, roll out.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for July 9th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan, ready to go on a joyride?
Which one? I think there have been 2 Joyride movies in the past, 20 years?
Yeah, I think there has been a few. I did see someone tweet out the posters of them. There certainly are a few. That's for sure.
Wasn't it with Paul Walker and Steve Zahn or something like that at one point? But we're not talking about that Joyride.
No.
We're talking about a very different Joyride, but I think the title is very appropriate given the context of that film and how we feel about it.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into it. And, I'm very excited. As we get into this, though, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to our very own M.N. Miller, who wrote this review for us at InSessionFilm.com, and he got pulled. There was a quote that was pulled for a little commercial that they ran, which was very exciting. And to my knowledge, that's the first time we've had that happen in video form. We've had a poster or two, I think, but never in a commercial.
Yes, I think that's right.
So that was very exciting. Congrats to him and all of that. I know I was pretty pumped. It was very, very
We're
cool
official. We're official.
I know. It was.
We've got credibility now.
Yeah, I know. I love that. So hopefully we'll be able to get a few more in there. But,
and really great for M.M. Miller on that one. And it was a great review. So if there is any review out there in written form on our website right now that really earns that pull in video form like that, this one's well-deserved. It was a really well-written piece.
Yep, it was very, very, very cool. All right, well, let's jump into this film. It is directed by Adele Lim. It stars Ashley Park, Sherry Cola, Stephanie Hsu, Sabrina Wu, among others. It follows 4 Chinese-American friends as they bond and discover the truth of what it means to know and love who you are while they travel through China in search of one of their birth mothers. Mm-hmm. All right, Brendan, I don't even know where to begin with this one, but what did you think about Joyride?
I feel like if we reference any specifics that happen in this movie, we may have to really take advantage of the censorship button because this movie's really raunchy, and good for it. Good for it. It might not be one I can recommend to everyone, just given certain tastes, but I ate this movie up. I think this movie rocks, and I kind of joke saying that the title is very appropriate. I think this is one of the most appropriately titled films of the year because it really is a joyride. And it's great to see a movie that is this, to put it bluntly, a raunchy sex comedy of sorts. When's the last time we've seen one like this that kind of has that, I don't want to say old-fashioned, but it reminds us of some of those raunchy movies we saw growing up that kind of had a resurgence in the late 2000s. And coincidentally, this is a film that is produced by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who were sort of part of that resurgence for us growing up. Yeah. And it's been a while, I feel like, since we've seen one that is legitimately this good. But there is a lot more going on here regarding Joyride with relating to its cultural specificity, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I think it does so in a way that still feels very universal. I think we can all relate to the notion that Audrey is going through with regard to her friend Lola. They were childhood friends, how that sort of jars with her college friendship, played by Stephanie Hsu, and how we've been through those things, right? When we grow up with friends and then we meet our new friends, there's our best friends from youth and our best friends from college, right? They're very different mindsets, very different things, and this film addresses that in a very culturally specific way without being about that cultural specificity all the time. So it straddles that line very well, and the film is just really funny. I took my fiance to see this with me, and there's a point in the movie. I'll simply say it involves an interjecting of 3 separate sexual things. Okay.
Yeah. We'll call this like the hotel sequence. This
the
all
hotel
takes place
sequence.
at a hotel.
It all takes place at a hotel. You're right. She had to leave to go to the bathroom. She said, I'm leaving to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
She stood up. The moment she missed.
She stood up. The second she stood up is when it got wild, and she said, no, I can hold it.
Yeah, I gotta wait to see this. Yeah.
But it's that kind of movie, and it tackles a lot, which I really appreciate. I think there's a lot to talk about here that the film does a really good job at handling.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved this as well. I'm completely with you. I thought it was hysterical. This is one of the funniest films I've seen in quite some time. Part of that is the structure of the film you noted, and I guess this was also part of the synopsis. There are 4 friends here, right? There's Audrey, Lola, Kat, and Deadeye.
Yeah. Well,
Audrey,
friends. They're not really. I mean, they're not all friends. At least at the beginning.
Yes, I'm about to get into that. So,
okay.
Audrey and Lola are best friends. We see them at the beginning of the movie, and I think what's fascinating about their dynamic, right, is that they are 2 friends that is somewhat contrived, right? Because they're the only 2 Asian girls that is otherwise a very white community. And their parents bring them together so they at least have something to bond over. And that's something that does bring them together throughout their childhood. However, what we come to find out very early on as well, their personalities clash. They are nothing alike. Which makes for a fascinating dynamic. And you enter in Kat into the picture, and you noted this, that Kat was Audrey's best friend in college. Yep. And so they have a shared mutual interest and likeness for each other. However, Kat and Lola, they do not get along.
No, I mean, you've experienced that, right? Where maybe like some of your friends from youth and then maybe college, there's almost like this like unspoken jealousy between them in some ways.
But in this case, it is very much spoken. It is out in the open. Like their rivalry is obvious. They are aware of it and they play into it in some great ways. And then there's Deadeye, which is one of the most mesmerizing characters I've seen in some time.
I think this is her first role, if I'm not mistaken, as an actress.
And Sabrina Wu is so great here as Deadeye, as this very eccentric character. She has these quirky sensibilities to her, but she's also incredibly affable. And there's a sense of loneliness that's driving that character as well that we can get into, but so essentially we have 4 very distinct characters here that often clash, but when they do come together, it makes for these incredible moments. And the chemistry, the camaraderie of the 4, Ashley Park, Sherry Cola, Stephanie Hsu, and Sabrina Wu, they are great together. Absolutely terrific. This is one of those groups, you mentioned like the Seth Rogen group and Jonah Hill and all those guys, like they were in multiple movies together. How many more movies can we see this group together?
Well, I was thinking about that. I'm not going to say what happens at the end of this movie, obviously, but there's a point where it ends up where I thought this is perfect territory for a sequel setup. I'm not saying that every movie should be a franchise, obviously, but some earn the right to be. Right? And I think this is one, because we go to repeating movies within a franchise because we love to see characters and that camaraderie continue. Yeah. And I think this is an example of that. Whether they play the same characters or not, maybe it could just be like a loose franchise of sorts where they play different characters, but the camaraderie is still ultimately there. But I think there's a point where this film ends where I can almost say, like, I kind of want to see that movie now. Like maybe there's a new misadventure that's completely different and completely new. Maybe it becomes more about another character this time around. Like there's more to be explored there that I think could be really interesting.
Yeah, or even if it's a completely different movie with different goals in mind, but you have these 4 and whatever additions you want to bring to it. Again, a la the Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill group and all those guys. Maybe this could be a replacement for that moving forward into the next decade, because as you noted, and we talked about this actually a few weeks ago during our state of cinema episode, that these type of movies rarely get to theaters. Like the success of this and Jennifer Lawrence's No Hard Feelings, I believe is the name of it.
Yeah.
Like those films need to succeed. And I think the early box office returns for this isn't promising, but Jennifer Lawrence's film actually did well. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, I guess, in that regard. But we want these films to succeed because we rarely get them in theaters these days. Often these movies go straight to Hulu or Netflix or whatever. But to get these raunchy, crass comedies in theaters, I do want to see more of it, because this film, when it gets into its debauchery, it is incredible.
Oh, it doesn't hold back. It is
a lot of fun.
I could see some people going into this who have maybe more PC minds, I'll simply say, who will come out of it thinking this should have been rated NC-17. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm not saying I agree with that.
Sure.
But I appreciate that the film has the audacity to go there. And you mentioned how there are comedies like this that normally find a place on Netflix or Hulu or some streaming service, and that is true. But even if this were one of those films, Joyride specifically, and I saw it for the first time on a streaming platform, I would think I would love to have seen this on the big screen, because it's not just raunchy and debaucherous, and it goes for it for sure, but there's actually kind of a bigness to this movie that feels very, very grand and cinematic. Without getting into detail, there's a full-on musical number at one point in this movie.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's the thing. That's where Adele Lim deserves a lot of credit as well with her direction, because, we mentioned the hotel sequence, and while the uncouth nature of it is absolutely a riot, the direction of it is noteworthy, and it brings a lot of laughs to that sequence, the dance sequence that you mentioned earlier, and maybe just overall the overall structure of the film in terms of its travel, because we do travel throughout China, maybe a few other places I won't get into. That yes, there is a bigness to this film, and I think Adele Lim does a great job of making it very cinematic. And while this will very much play at home, in on your couch, on your 9-inch TV. This will play wonderfully at home, but I think seeing this in a theater in terms of its performances and direction, that alone is worth the price of admission. However, and if your experience was anything like mine, Brennan, and this is something that is harder to replicate at home, at least if you have my lifestyle, maybe you have the ability to bring 1,000 friends over to your house every single weekend and you guys can watch movies. I don't have that ability. So going to the theater to watch this with what was essentially a full crowd for me was incredible.
And that joint laughter, that's always something that helps with your experience with a comedy or maybe a horror film, the shared sense of fear that everyone has. You can kind of feel that energy in the room, even if you don't know the person. The community aspect
of it, for me, played a big part.
Well, the other thing, too, when you watch something at home, depending on your family circumstances, there's a lot more opportunity for interruption, right? Which is usually never a good thing. And I think it's even worse for a movie like Joyride, which really thrives on its editing, its comedic timing. It's not one of those movies you can just stop and come back into because a lot of it is, like I said, the editing, which I think is in many ways the unsung hero here, the editing here by Nana Erb, I believe her name is, and what she's doing here alongside Adele Lim, who makes her directorial debut, we also have to add. And I know that she's also been a writer on movies like Raya and the Last Dragon. I think she also was one of the writers on Crazy Rich Asians as well. Okay. So she makes her directorial debut here, but what's going on behind the scenes really helps complement the comedic timing of its four leads, who are already so great. We're going to talk more about them, I'm sure, during this conversation. But the point is, this is not one of those movies that you can really put on at home and expect that you could still get through with whatever constant interruption you're dealing with at home, right? Because any type of interruption is just going to completely flatten whatever the comedic timing is for that brief moment.
Absolutely. And look, when it comes to the theaters, it is very much a thin line, right? Because, when it comes to the community aspect of it, if you're disengaged or generally there are just people out there that have no etiquette whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they don't care, and they disrupt your theater experiences. I mean, this happens all the time. Thankfully, my experiences haven't been quite as drastic, but even this last weekend, I saw a TikTok and a thing on Twitter of people talking about how awful their theater experiences were just in the last week. So, it does happen. However, when your theater, when the audience is fully engaged, it does make a big difference. And I think that was very much part of the pun intended joy for me with this film. There's a moment where Kat is she's talking with her boyfriend Clarence, and this is actually the first time we meet him, and we get that moment. It's shown in the trailers of Audrey and Lola, Deadeye. They're all gawking at him as he's there with his shirt off and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
which is hilarious. I'm going to give this one joke away because I have to make a point. It's really great, but there's a moment where Kat and Clarence, they're embracing, and you can sense that there's a little bit of tension between the two of them. But he points to this cross that he has on this necklace that he's wearing, and the line he says to Kat was, I have to leave room for Jesus. Like when they're hugging, like we have to separate a little bit because I got to leave room for Jesus. As soon as he says that, some guy at our theater says, "Amen, brother." And there's a whole nother laughter.
But see, like
crowd.
that's the kind of interruption that I don't necessarily dislike. Right?
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah, because it's almost like it's part of the movie in some ways, because the movie comedically is kind of asking you to participate in it.
Yes.
And I think that's really, well, that means that the person who said that was engaged by the movie, so that means the movie's working then.
Exactly. And everybody laughed alongside with him, so it got an extra laugh that wasn't there with the film. The film didn't do anything to earn that laugh other than an engaged audience, which the film did a great job of drawing in. So in that sense, it was earned. And that can happen with movies like this when it's executed well. And I think that's important because when you take a step back and you look at the writing of the film, or at least the plotting and its overarching structure, this film is not reinventing the wheel narratively.
Absolutely
It is
not,
a very tropey movie. However, what the big difference to me is that this film embraces its tropes. It's not trying to hide from them, but it's how the film goes about executing those tropes that makes a huge difference, because often it's full of chaos, it's full of carnage, it's very crass, and the film leans into that. And then there's everything we talked about with Lim's direction when it comes to either the hotel sequence or the musical number, whatever the case may be. And so from an execution perspective, this film absolutely nails it. And to me, that's what's most important here. So, the tropiness of the film isn't bothersome as much as, how this film goes about maneuvering those tropes. It makes this film original, and it feels like something we've never seen before, even though it is formulaic. If that
well,
makes
that's
sense.
the thing. Yeah, what's on the page in a movie like this is almost never going to seem like a new direction, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost impossible. It's all about the way it's communicated comedically, emotionally. That's what matters, and the energy here feels kind of different, like you're saying. And with regard to any type of raunchy sex comedy like this, I mean, there is some sex and crassness in the movie, but it's not really a sex comedy. To call it a sex comedy makes it sound like it's more comparable to something like American Pie, which was about sex. Like, sex was part of the plot synopsis. This is not really that. It's just very raunchy. But it's still in the tradition of those raunchy comedies. What matters is are we engaged by the characters? Which is a very common thing to say about any movie, really, right? Like, are we engaged by the characters?
It kind of
like,
comes down to that with all of them.
But
yes,
that's something you have to talk about. With movies like this, you have to talk about that. I mean, we go back to the classics from the 1970s that really kind of invented the raunch in many ways, like National Lampoon's Animal House, for instance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we go back to that movie because we love John Belushi, right? Like from a character and performative standpoint, there's a draw. It's not just about the gag, which some of them have been about, and those are the ones we tend to forget about in the long run. But here, the 4 leads here are instantaneously likable, and some of them shouldn't be. You know, like I think, for instance, the character of Lola or Lolo, played by Sherry Cola. I feel like if it weren't for Sherry Cola's performance, that character would have been instantaneously unlikable, right? Like, because there's an energy to her that could be very off-putting and just really tough to sink your teeth into, right? I mean, this is a character who deliberately makes very provocative art. This character could have seemed very insufferable in the long run, but never does. And that's the sign of a great performance and finding that dividing line to be able to balance it all out. And that's why this movie works so well. Everyone is just likable, and that's the big thing here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Sherry Cola, her performance here, does a lot of the heavy lifting because, there's aspects to her character that make her, I don't know if unlikable is the word, but maybe leaves a little bit to be desired in some ways.
Certainly loud.
It's certainly loud.
Yeah.
However you want to articulate that, you know, there is a huge, there's a vivid gap between her and Audrey. We'll simply leave it at that. However, Cola's performance is so fun, but at the same time, and this is the kicker, I think, is that she's extremely sincere. So her ambitions are different. It doesn't make her lesser of a person. And as the film unfolds, that sincerity comes through so palpably in her performance. So
that right there is the big difference, because in any other movie like this, a character that made provocative art like that, in the case of another raunchy movie that was doing it poorly, it would have been just for the sake of that provocative art. It would just be for the sake of that gag. But here, it's a character trait that's meant to mirror an artist that's trying to provoke conversation through her art, which is a relatable notion. The film is just having fun with that notion, so it actually has a character moment to support it.
But it comes from an affable place. Like, she simply wants conversation around sex to be out in the open, like to normalize it. And she's trying to provoke that through her art. And as you're talking about, the film has a lot of fun. Even if early on the film is treating her as some sort of outside figure because of that, but the film deconstructs it as it goes, and we see that sincerity come to the surface, and so she becomes one of the best characters by the end here, and I love how that rubs against Audrey throughout the film as well. Audrey, a fascinating character on her own because she's adopted by white parents, and that renders her a certain way among her peers. There's a lot of jokes that she's more white than she is Asian. But as she's on this journey through China, she's trying to discover her identity more through her heritage and where she comes from. And there's a fascinating reveal inside of that that I won't get into here for spoiler reasons, but how that crystallizes. And that's why I wanted to emphasize execution earlier, because the sentimentality of this film, again, isn't reinventing the wheel. However,
it is still surprising, though.
The execution of it, I think, is really great. It is very, very good. That moment she has at the end, as it relates to, let's say, closure, an idea that I kind of love.
I think we need to rename this podcast, JD.
But I'm just saying, like, once she gets that moment of closure, it is striking in its pathos. It is really, really great. And I think the film earns that because of its execution. Like, to me, it doesn't matter how formulaic or derivative it is. The film leans into it in a really great way that I think makes sense for her character here. And again, the performances in it all are really great. So to me, that's it's kind of wild for how debaucherous this film is. And there are some visual gags here regarding its crassness that you just will not unsee once you see it.
Oh, I have a few of them written down.
Yeah.
One of them, one of them involves the devil.
Yeah. Well, and we can get to that here in a second. I bring that up to say, for as wild as the film gets in that regard, it has this incredible swing towards sentimentality that is maybe a little bit unexpected, but again, I think there's a heftness to it that I really loved here. I was very moved by it all.
It does become a slight tearjerker for a moment, which is very surprising and could have seemed very jarring and off kilter for a film like this, but it weirdly kind of makes sense because you mentioned that there is kind of a deconstructionist mentality here going on from a cultural standpoint, and I think that's where the film is able to surpass some of its mere raunchy crassness that most movies like this carry and really thrive on. There's more going on here with regard to Asian culture and what that means for these people, and that twist you're talking about, which we won't get into. I think it has a lot of interesting notions about the unfortunate generalities that exist regarding Asian people and how that can even exist within that same culture, right? And it almost creates this really interesting idea, and I'm going to use a word that I don't like to use, but the word is used a few times in the movie, and that word is racist. But it is an interesting idea that can you actually be that for your own people, right? And there is that question that's kind of raised here. I'm not saying anyone in the movie is or even isn't, but it makes for an interesting conversation that I think the film is kind of asking us to participate in. And by the end, when we get to some of those reveals regarding Asian culture, I found that so provocative and so sincere and, dare I say, kind of sweet and tender as well. And I did not expect that, but the film does have a lot of interesting things on its mind.
I completely agree, and I love how the film delves into it, even if, again, how tropey it is, there's a sincerity here that I do think is really quite mesmerizing. And the performances in it all, I cannot echo that enough.
Yeah. Ashley Park's great, especially in those moments during that reveal. It's really great. It becomes a very different movie, but it doesn't feel like a different movie, which is a very hard thing to pull off for any director.
Well, and I think the film does a great job of building to that because there's a moment early on between Lolo and Audrey when talking about, where she comes from and is this something we pursue as we get to China, and she kind of scoffs at it. And then when they get to China, it's one of the first things Lolo brings up, like, we should go find your mom. And she's like, I don't want to do that. But then she's somewhat forced into it, given some of the craziness that goes down at the club, and some of the visual gags there are quite remarkable. Sure, and so they go on this journey. It's brought up a few times, and Audrey is always a little bit hesitant to it, and then there comes the moment with the dress and how she feels inside that dress that I think is striking on its own. So, like, the film never loses sight of Audrey in terms of where she comes from. So, yes, a lot of the humor here takes emphasis for sure, but it's not as if Audrey's identity, how that's evolving, that's never in the background just simmering there. It is there. And
no,
so,
you're right. There is an escalation, right?
Yeah.
It's not when we talk about this sudden shift, it's really more about tone, right?
Yeah.
But narratively speaking, it doesn't become a completely different movie out of left field. There is a transition of sorts that, you're right, it feels like it was building towards. So it's not like this false transition just to manufacture drama or anything like that.
And the timing of it is impeccable because there's always going to come that moment in these films where everything falls apart and everybody hates everybody. Like, that's just part of the formula. And that moment comes, and it's there where she's able to pursue that identity because she's away from everybody else. And so it allows for that pathos to really come through in a proficient way, which I think is really great. So again, to me, it all comes down to execution. And I do think the writing here is is quite good, and Lim's direction is great. But these performances, Park is quite fantastic. Sherry Cola nails it. She's so funny in this film. Stephanie Hsu is Stephanie Hsu. She's wonderful. And Sabrina Wu, who I wasn't really familiar with, what a character. What a character. I mean, Deadeye is...
And that's all. That's all they're credited as. Deadeye. I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
really quirky.
It's a quirky character. She's, she talks early on about how all of her friends are online. So like it certainly invokes a sense of loneliness in the character. But she has these conversations, particularly with Audrey, and the film kind of gets into the juxtaposition of their lives. And I guess I don't want to get too much into it because it does start to reveal some spoilers, but how Deadeye and her community come through for her, it's wow. It is quite unforgettable.
It's quite unforgettable. And I mean, we referenced some of the things that happened, which were unforgettable in and of themselves, but I mean, there is still, again, it's all about balance, right? I feel like that moment is like the epitome of why this movie works so well, because it's very crass, it's very big, it's very musical, but it's also kind of tender and sweet. It's the moment of the film where I feel like every individual component is operating on all cylinders, and yet it somehow feels of a piece with one another. You almost have like 5 different genres working in that moment, and yet it really does work. Again, it's all about this synergy between character, whatever's going on behind the scenes. There's certainly a collective understanding of what movie is really being attempted here, and everyone here believes in that same vision, and that's what matters, and that's what you're able to sense here.
I do want to say this, though, going back to that musical number of sorts, how it all ends, because it's from there, once that sequence crystallizes, that's where we get the drama of the film, where everything falls apart and these characters start to loathe each other. I find it so funny that there's a reveal that revolves. It's pretty crass. It revolves around, we'll say, the devil. That visual image, it launches all this drama.
It does. It's an image you're never gonna forget. But it's ironic that that's the image, a devilish image like that pushes everyone over the edge.
That's what it takes. And
I mean, but keeping to the topic of comedy for a second, because it's still a very funny gag, but there are images in this movie I'm not going to forget. I'll never look at a basketball the same way again because of this movie.
The basketball.
And I know, and I feel like we can have a separate conversation on like real life athletes who appear in movies and who gives the best performance of them. I mean, I guess, do we want to reveal who's in this movie? A professional sports player, professional basketball player is in this movie, playing themselves, sort of themselves, from what I understand. But it's they're really funny in the movie as well.
No, it's great. Now that whole hotel sequence from beginning to end is quite wonderful. One of my favorite jokes, honestly, of the film. And this is, it's not quite as obvious or as outlandish as some of the others. However, there's a moment when they first get to the hotel, and one of the basketball players is someone that Kat recognizes. And so then it becomes very awkward all of a sudden. There is a Harry Potter joke that I died over. I lost it. It was so good.
Oh my gosh!
And I love that. And that's just a moment of awkward tension that they're just trying to make the best of that situation. And
I know. Then it leads to a gym sequence.
And so
again, I don't think I'll be able to look at the fitness of it all in the same way again either. If I ever go to the gym again, I'm going to be thinking about that scene.
Because it all kind of compounds on itself, right? Where there's that moment, you get to the gym, there's like a bar sequence, then characters find themselves in various rooms and things unfold. And
Again, it's the editing. It's the editing.
editing
And the
of
way
it
that
is
that
quite
edit just
great.
crystallizes to the next morning is pitch perfect.
That part is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like I love that irony. So like, that whole sequence from when they first arrive to the moment they leave is truly one of the best scenes of the year as far as I'm concerned.
Good movie.
So good.
Really funny movie. I can't
Really
wait to
good.
see this one again because it is one of those movies that's I hate to use this term to praise comedies because I feel like it's a bit of a tired praise, but they say like joke per second. But this kind of is that. There are a lot that I know I missed, and I can't wait to go back and watch the film again to try and collect them all. It's almost like this scavenger hunt of where these jokes are, and I think a great comedy is able to make you go back and try and find those. And I'm going to laugh again because I'm probably going to discover some new ones that I haven't heard the first time.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because that is honestly one of the first things I have written here in my notes, and we didn't really get to it earlier, but I do find the writing here really fascinating how, there's a joke every 5 seconds here in this film, but simultaneously there are gags that take their time evolving over the course of the movie.
Oh yeah,
So, like,
there are ones that are very calculated that reveal themselves multiple times as the film goes on.
Absolutely. So like the longevity of some of the jokes here are great in their calculations, and also the verbal sparring, the jokes every 2 seconds is also dazzling. So like all of that works, and then there's the sentimentality we talked about. Like there really is an incredible balance here, and to me again, that's why I'm very much okay with the tropes of this film because the film uses it to their advantage.
Oh yeah,
And
it treats
it
comedy
makes
like math.
fun of
I mean,
it,
it's mathematical in that way, but at the same time, some of those jokes per minute that we're talking about and the looseness of it all, I would not be surprised if a lot of those sequences were strung together based on these actors just kind of communicating with each other off script.
Oh yeah,
and
much of it could be improvised. Who knows?
There was a very improvisational vibe to some of this, which I love. I love that, but why I love it so much is the way that there's still this narrative seamlessness to it all, as if it still feels calculated, which is so difficult to do. But I would not be surprised if some of these actors just kind of riffed on each other. And we were able to capture that and morph it into the narrative in some way.
I definitely want to see the behind the scenes.
Oh gosh.
Or the outtakes.
Oh gosh, buy this on Blu-ray because there's probably a blooper reel somewhere that'll be just as entertaining in its own respective way.
No doubt about it. Any final thoughts here on Joyride?
I hope people see it because, as we were talking about in the beginning, we want to see movies like this do well that make people laugh. I mean, now, granted, we talked about the raunchiness of this movie. It's very raunchy. It's very crass. It might not be for everyone out there, but I do want to at least see audiences give this one a chance. Because hopefully if it does well, I'd like to see these 4 actors come together for something else. If it's something in this same story arc, like a pseudo sequel of sorts, or just some other movie with the same directing and editing, writing team and everything, I would like to see that partnership continue because I do think there is kind of this lightning strike happening here. Perfect synergy, perfect comedic synergy here that I think is really hard to come by nowadays.
Yep. No, I completely agree. One other scene I want to bring up here, and this is another great example of the film deconstructing its ideas on culture and expectations. There's a moment where they are on a train and they find a cabin, and it is the only cabin they find that has one passenger in it, and it is a white girl, presumably from America, but now living in China. The way the film gets into expectations based off of how they grew up and race and culture, it is hysterical.
It's hysterical,
really great,
but it's thematically potent as well.
It is
fits
thematically
the narrative
very
here.
provocative. Yeah.
Especially given the one character of these 4 who embraces this other person as quote unquote normal. Ignorantly sees them as normal. It's the right character to think that because of what their upbringing is.
Oh, I completely agree. And that's what I love about how the film is delving into race, albeit mostly in these subtle ways. But this is a scene where it's a little bit obvious, but the film is making it's bringing awareness to the obviousness of the situation and calling it out in these really great ways.
And it's kind of making fun of itself in the process in some ways. Maybe not directly, but well, that's what matters here. It's like a movie like this can be as obvious as it wants, as long as it keeps making me laugh along the way. And this one did.
Well, and it makes sense for Audrey's character progression, right?
Yeah.
Given where she comes from. And this isn't the first time they've made fun of her for being quote unquote white.
Yeah.
But given where the film goes in terms of her identity and where it all goes, this is just one of those moments along the way that gives credence to why her friends treat her the way they do. Yeah. And it's hysterical. Like the way it unfolds is just really, really fun.
It's really funny. So. Yeah, I agree.
I really loved this film quite a bit. I highly recommend it. I mentioned earlier, I think its box office numbers aren't super great. So if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. It is worth your time, especially if you can find a moment at night, perhaps, where there's going to be a crowded theater. Where whatever theater you go to, just try to find one where you see a lot of the dots selected. Well, there's going to be a lot of people. Go to that one.
But even if you can't, I'm sure you'll still enjoy it nonetheless. It's not required, but that crowd will certainly help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Either way, though, it is absolutely worth your money. It is worth your time. Very, very excited to see more from Adele Lim as a director, wherever that may take her. And as we noted earlier, this group here, these four, whether it's a sequel to this or just another movie, I don't care. I would love to see them be our new comedy group that takes control of Hollywood.
Yeah,
I would love that.
I agree. Let's see it happen.
All right. With that, if you agree or disagree with anything that we had to say here, you can leave us a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, just leave a comment below, or you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads.
Threads, can't forget Threads.
Whatever the new ones are. I can't keep up with it all. It's overwhelming.
At this point, let's just say social media. Find us somewhere.
Just find us somewhere. InSession Film is our handle everywhere.
Yeah.
So go and check that out. We noted there's a written review up on our website and at InSessionFilm.com. I have a movie review on YouTube as well. Okay, with all that said, Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, this was a fun joyride, JD. A fun joyride. I have to say that. Yeah,
it was really great. So, even if the film maybe doesn't exceed expectations box office wise, I really hope this does find an audience.
This is one of those movies that I think I wouldn't be surprised. This is one of those movies I feel like would find an audience after the fact. That happens a lot with movies like this, I feel like.
I agree. So, there's a lot going on right now. It is the summer. There's plenty to see. We have Mission Impossible coming up, Barbie, Oppenheimer. It's possible that people are just... Yeah, it's possible people are just waiting for those movies to come, and they're going to see this when it comes out on Netflix or wherever it lands. But
yeah. I just hope it doesn't become one of those cases where we get the announcement, the dreaded announcement that after 1 week it's going to be streaming somewhere or available on digital. Remember the days when these movies used to be playing in theaters for 6 months or something like that before we could rent them at Blockbuster?
Yeah. It's a different world now.
Yeah, it would end up at a main theater, then it might be at your local dollar theater for a few weeks, and then it would be available to rent somewhere. I miss that that trajectory from the old days.
Sadly, though, unless the whole system crumbles on itself, which isn't out of the realms of impossibility, let's be honest.
I was going to say, I feel like it has.
I don't see that changing anytime soon, but you never know. You never know. At any rate, however you can see this, please go and watch it. It's really great. Thanks for listening, watching, everybody. We will see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. That Harry Potter joke killed me. It's so good.
Oh, basketball, man.
Trying to grab all the groceries in one trip? Oof, not how you would have done that. You know sometimes less is more. Like when you drive less and save with the USAA annual mileage discount. USAA. Get a quote today.